Russia is being abandoned. Historic rupture is unfolding before our eyes. Azerbaijan openly turns its back on the Kremlin. Kazakhstan launches hundreds of criminal cases against those who fought for Russia. Uzbekistan and Central Asia pulled out of Moscow's orbit and into direct talks with the West. Moldova is moving to reclaim Transnistria. Turkey challenges Moscow over weapons, money and loyalty, shaking NATO from the inside. Inside the Kremlin, panic grows as alliances collapse, leverage disappears, and former brothers choose a different path. Even Ukraine's peace proposal exposes how isolated Moscow has become. Russia is losing its grip, country by country, region by region, and the consequences could redraw the geopolitical map. Let's break down what's happening right now. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Kazakhstan's authorities are launching criminal cases by the hundreds against their own citizens who fought against Ukraine on Russia's side. Over the past year alone, around 700 criminal cases have been opened against Kazakh nationals for participating in the war as part of Russian forces. According to the courts, the same crimes is attributed both to mercenaries of the Wagner PMC and to those who signed contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense. Under Kazakhstan's criminal code, their actions are classified as having criminal intent to participate in the war. In previous years, the numbers of such cases in Kazakhstan was limited to dozens per year. The situation changed after the Ukrainian project Want to Live published the personal data of alleged mercenaries. According to calculations by Mediazona and BBC Russian service, nearly 200 citizens or natives of Kazakhstan have been killed while fighting against Ukraine. Meanwhile, a real geopolitical shift is unfolding. Kazakhstan and Central Asia as a whole are breaking out of the Kremlin's orbit. Donald Trump makes a sharp move, personally inviting Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to the G20 summit, a clear signal that the regional balance is changing. Trump described relations with Tashkent and Astana as excellent, openly signaling that Central Asia has become a zone of strategic U.S. interest. The invitation as honorary guests is not mere diplomacy, it is recognition of the region's special role as these countries suddenly move to the front line of global politics. The president of Azerbaijan delivered a clear diplomatic rebuff to the Kremlin, refusing to travel to Russia for a summit attended by Vladimir Putin. Ilham Aliyev skipped the Commonwealth of Independent States Head of State meeting held on December 22nd in St. Petersburg. The Azerbaijani presidential administration publicly confirmed the reason for the decision.
The head of our state will be unable to participate in the informal CIS Heads of State Summit, which will be held today in St. Petersburg, due to a busy work schedule.
The Kremlin said it was understanding of Aliyev's decision to cancel his trip to St. Petersburg. Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's press secretary, rushed to comment and attempt to downplay what was widely seen as a clear diplomatic setback for Moscow. Earlier, Moscow insisted it was expecting Aliyev and was actively preparing for his arrival in St. Petersburg. However, media outlets drew an unmistakable conclusion. Aliyev chose not to travel for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. Urgent! Moldova, together with the European Union and the United States, is working on a plan to reintegrate Transnistria. The announcement was made by Moldova's Deputy Prime Minister for Reintegration, Valeriu Kiver.
We are indeed actively working on a strategy or a roadmap for reintegration. But as you know, sensitive issues require caution. We need to think through steps that will deliver results later. We cannot disclose all actions in real time because that could harm the final outcome. The work is ongoing.
Nevertheless, the Deputy Prime Minister emphasized that Moldova does not want the Transnistria issue to be folded into a broader negotiations, including talks on ending the Russia-Ukraine war, underscoring Chisinau's intent to keep the matter separate and sovereign. Turkey is seeking to return Russia's air defense systems and recover its money. Ankara wants to send the S-400 systems back to Russia to unwind the deal that has blocked its access to U.S. F-35 fighter jets. Erdogan raised the issue during a meeting with Putin in Turkmenistan. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is actively denying that any such request was ever made. Washington has recently stepped up pressure on Turkey as Ankara pushes to regain access to U.S. weapons and rejoin the F-35 program. Erdogan discussed the issue directly with Trump during talks in Washington.
The U.S. president's close ally, Tom Barrack, who's ambassador to Turkey, said earlier this month that Ankara was closer to giving up the S-400s, predicting the issue could be resolved in the next 4 to 6 months.
At the same time, Ankara is not merely seeking to return the systems, it is demanding that Russia reimburse the billions of dollars spent on the purchase. One option under discussion could involve major discounts on Russian oil and natural gas imports as compensation. NATO believes that Russia could gain valuable intelligence if Turkey were to operate the S-400 systems alongside F-35 jets. Abandoning the Russian air defense systems would deliver Ankara a significant trust dividend with its allies, countering long-standing accusations of excessive closeness to Moscow.
The U.S. kicked Ankara out of the F-35 program in 2019 in response to the acquisition of the S-400s. Washington then invoked the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, known as CAATSA, in 2020, to stop Turkey's defense industry getting access to sensitive technology.
Next year, Ukraine's armed forces will receive 200 Bogdana self-propelled howitzers mounted on the new Mercedes-Benz Zetros chassis. Germany has allocated 750 million euros for this major tranche of artillery support. More on the deepening military cooperation between Kyiv and Berlin in our report.
Germany remains one of Ukraine's key partners in Europe.
Russia's war of aggression is aimed not only at Ukraine, but at Europe as a whole. And if Ukraine falls, this war will not stop. Just as in 1938 the Sudetenland was not enough for Hitler, Putin will not stop.
Military, financial and political support. Since the start of the full-scale war, it has been constantly expanding.
The Merz government, unlike its predecessor, is quite serious about, first and foremost, restoring Germany's prominent and influential position within Europe, and it takes a truly realistic and pragmatic view of what can genuinely and effectively ensure Europe's long-term security and stability. Helping Ukraine is a significant investment in Germany's national security.
It's not just about political support as the main thing. For 2026, Berlin plans to allocate a record amount of aid to Ukraine, 11.5 billion euros, as well as 170 million euros in winter support for infrastructure restoration.
We will continue to help Ukraine, despite opposition from political forces, the left and friends of Russia. On the right in this parliament,
Financial aid is also supplemented by military assistance. Recently, Germany delivered a Patriot system and the 9th IRIS-T system to Ukraine. This
Transfer of critically important types of weaponry to Ukraine which are needed by Germany itself. For example, the Germans took a very long time with those same Patriots because these very systems were and remain key for the air defense of the European continent.
And for next year, Defense Minister Boris Pistorius announced a major delivery of air-to-air missiles from the country's stockpiles. But that's not all.
A widely utilized short-range missile system that possesses a comprehensive array of modifications and advanced capabilities, and our F-16s are in desperate need of such crucial weaponry. Obviously, we are in dire need of any and all available missiles, especially for the critical task of air defense. Even if these armaments are older models, we will undoubtedly discover an effective method to deploy and utilize them efficiently.
Ukraine and Germany have also signed a new defense agreement worth over 1 billion euros. It includes long-term deliveries of spare parts for the Patriot system, purchases of Ukrainian UAVs, deliveries of new electronic warfare systems, and much more.
This is yet another declaration of intent. It's a framework agreement. A declaration of intent does not imply immediate contracts. It gives them a green corridor. If both sides, the Ukrainian side and German manufacturers if they work hard on its implementation, it will materialize into concrete projects.
A separate area is the transition to joint weapons production. For the first time in Europe, Berlin and Kyiv will launch joint production of combat drones.
Joint production efforts, joint operational strategies, and joint training exercises. These are the levers that strengthen the security of Europe and, along with it, the security of Ukraine.
Germany is no longer just a donor, it is a strategic partner of Ukraine. Money, weapons, and joint production make its support long-term and influential.
The peace plan proposed by Volodymyr Zelensky has already been reviewed inside the Kremlin. Moscow's response signals sharp resistance and exposes the real limits of compromise. How Vladimir Putin reacted, what conditions Russia is floating behind closed doors, and whether a real peace agreement is even possible. All ahead.
Volodymyr Zelensky has presented a draft agreement to end the war. Representatives from Ukraine, the US, and Europe worked on it. The basic ceasefire document contains 20 points instead of the 28 proposed by the Americans. In addition, it includes draft documents on security guarantees for Ukraine and its reconstruction.
Ukraine has never been and will never be an obstacle to peace. We are working actively and doing everything to ensure that the documents exist and that they are realistic. The main thing is that Russia does not sabotage this diplomacy and takes the end of the war completely seriously. If not, there should be additional pressure on Russia. The world has the tools to make this pressure work to achieve peace. Thank you to everyone who is helping.
So how did the Kremlin respond to all this? What was the Kremlin's answer? Yes, absolutely nothing. Instead of the much anticipated reaction from Putin, the bunker meetings of the State Council began with news that was far more important to him.
I congratulate you on the upcoming new year. The year 2026 has been declared the year of unity of the peoples of Russia.
But the Russian president's unwillingness to talk about a ceasefire in Ukraine still doesn't save him from responsibility for dodging peace. Like it or not, subscribe. Sign it, beauty. The White House administration, together with official Kyiv, is increasingly using force and diplomacy to push the Kremlin toward a compromise in the war in Ukraine.
This will be done, and it will be done quickly.
The latest report from the Institute for the Study of War asserts that Russia will have to compromise on its demands, which are incompatible with the American and Ukrainian peace plans. As US Ambassador to NATO Matt Whitaker stated the day before, the ball is now in Russia's court and the future depends solely on the Kremlin. A ceasefire. And with every minute of delay, Trump irritates Putin more and more.
The Kremlin has repeatedly put forward demands that are incompatible with many of the proposals in the 20-point plan. And it has shown that it is not interested in a settlement based on compromises like those, which it seems are embodied in the latest document.
Meanwhile, Moscow claims that Russia and the United States reached an understanding based on the bunker demands at the summit in Alaska in August 2025. However, analysts insist that such a position by the Russian Federation does not demonstrate a desire to resolve the conflict, but merely the Kremlin's rejection of the proposals. According to the 28 and 20-point plans for Putin may not accept it, but he will be forced to agree. Political analysts insist the Kremlin pays too high a price every day to hold the front in Ukraine. The Russian economy is bursting at the seams. There is no more money in the treasury to pay Russian mercenaries their salaries, let alone recruiting new contract soldiers, which means the whole operation needs to be urgently wound down.
No matter how much the sly ghoul keeps saying that all the goals that the so-called special operation will be accomplished, even in Russia now, part of the population understands that Donbass, they could keep fighting for many, many more years. And as for Kyiv, they can just forget about it and stop dreaming. But before negotiations, Putin, of course, tries to strengthen his bargaining position as much as possible, threatening with Limp Yar's missiles, Poseidon's Burevestniks, claiming that Russia's economy is skyrocketing, building things out there, some kind of power plants on the moon. But to actually do, and it's getting harder and harder for him to convince anyone.
But there's no escaping the harsh reality. Every month, the Kremlin loses more wounded and killed in the war in Ukraine than it did in 10 years in Afghanistan, and in return, it has only managed to seize a few square kilometers of scorched earth. But even for those, Putin is willing to sacrifice tens or even hundreds of thousands of Russian lives just to avoid admitting his obvious impotence in this war. So
that means Russia has to sign this clause, has to admit essentially the collapse of the myth that Ukraine is an artificial state. For Putin, to be honest, signing this would be an ideological defeat. I mean, he himself said that Ukraine is an artificial state, and now he would have to recognize its sovereignty.
But at the same time, the bunker dweller really doesn't want to anger Trump either. Putin understands perfectly well that further arms supplies to the armed forces of Ukraine will depend on his decision. If the Kremlin doesn't agree to peace today, as soon as tomorrow American Tomahawks could be flying its way,
one can understand Russia's position, which also doesn't want, let's say, to ruin relations with Trump.
The bunker dweller has been given only 3 months for everything. The White House is confident that it is quite possible to resolve the war in Ukraine, and achieve a lasting peace within the next 90 days. So, Trump has made it clear to the Kremlin that it must reach a compromise by spring.
Azerbaijan has taken a step after which the Kremlin has virtually no room left to maneuver. The Caucasus is emerging from Russia's shadow, and the world can clearly see it. Ilham Aliyev is setting in motion a process that strikes directly at the core of the Kremlin's power vertical. Moscow is losing leverage, allies are drifting away, and the region is beginning to live by new rules. On top of that, Azerbaijan is openly demonstrating support for Ukraine. The stakes have risen to the maximum level. The most explosive details of this geopolitical rupture next.
On December 22nd, Putin organized an informal summit of the leaders of the Commonwealth of Independent States. He decided to gather everyone but refused to travel himself. Only the president of Azerbaijan. Ilham Aliyev preferred not to meet with Putin even though he was expected at the Kremlin, so he cited a busy schedule as the reason.
The head of our state will not be able to participate in the informal CIS summit of heads of state, which will take place today in St. Petersburg due to a busy work schedule.
But is the schedule really the reason? Lately, the strained relations between Moscow and Azerbaijan have become very apparent. In
fact, this is not the first such case in which Aliyev demonstrates that Russia and Moscow are no longer important for Baku. Some kind of geopolitical center of attraction. In principle, both the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict and the subsequent Russian-Azerbaijani one, such a vivid demonstration of Azerbaijan's drift away from Moscow towards Turkey and essentially Baku's own assertion of subjectivity. Therefore, if we speak in general, the reason for such a change in international politics was Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Putin, having thrown all his efforts into trying to destroy Ukraine, has largely lost ground within the framework of his geopolitical influence. Since
the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, there have already been several conflicts between Russia and Azerbaijan. The tension began with the plane crash. On December 25th, 2024, the Russian Federation shot down an Azerbaijan Airlines plane with a missile. Technical malfunction, self-destruction, missile debris, there were many versions. There were many from Russia. Later, Putin decided to shift the blame onto Ukraine, claiming it was because of a Ukrainian attack. A Russian air defense missile, which was shooting down drones, accidentally exploded nearby. And then Putin apologized to Aliyev.
And even then, in our first phone conversation, I not only apologized for the fact that the tragedy happened in Russian airspace, but also expressed my deepest condolences to the families.
But the apology came too late. Right after the disaster, a real intelligence war broke out between Russia and Azerbaijan. In Russia, Azerbaijani businessmen and influential figures began to be detained. The same thing happened in Azerbaijan, with Russian citizens being detained. Tensions rose to such a level that within Putin's inner circle, they were already discussing what to do about Aliyev. This was being discussed in the Russian media.
On the one hand, it was obvious to everyone that Aliyev needed to be put in his place. On the other hand, Vladimir Putin does not intend to apologize for the Azal plane that was shot down over Grozny. A third important factor is Turkey's significant influence over Azerbaijan and Erdogan's attempt to take a leading role in the Caucasus. Even in the medium term, this is unpleasant and even dangerous for Russia.
Yes, Aliyev has started doing more business with Erdogan. Moreover, as Russians are writing, there are plans to create a NATO analog on Russia's borders. The Kremlin has taken note of the new round of cooperation between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and other Turkic peoples. In the federal media, the Organization of Turkic States, OTS, whose summit was held in October, has been called the NATO equivalent for Central Asia and the South Caucasus in Azerbaijan. But Putin did not react sharply to all of this.
Aliyev is important to Putin. In general, if we look at the adventure that he unleashed it in the form of a war against Ukraine. This was his desire, on the contrary, to raise his own status, to demonstrate the capabilities of the Russian economy, the Russian army, to emphasize the status of a world power, one of those that determines destinies, that extends its influence in various forms. And it even came to military means. That is why the South Caucasus has always been strategic for Russia. And in the 19th, 18th, and 20th centuries, Russians fought wars there. Russians tried to use their soft power Essentially, for Russia, the South Caucasus region is in many significant ways a crucial gateway, serving as a vital connection point both to the expansive Middle East and to the vast continent of Asia. This profound geopolitical reality explains precisely why Baku's recent and notable shift in its foreign policy orientation hits Vladimir Putin's strategic ambitions extremely hard and directly.
But Putin's ambitions continue to grow because later Aliyev began to speak out in support of Ukraine and advised Ukrainians not to agree to occupation.
I think this resonates with the aspirations of the Ukrainian people. Never agree to occupation. That is the main advice. That is what we did.
Moreover, not just in terms of information, but also economically. Aliyev is turning away from Putin. Baku has lifted the ban on the transit of goods to Armenia through its territory. Now the parties have moved on to the next stage, direct trade in strategic resources without intermediaries.
From an economic point of view, it might be possible. It's a political issue because even though Yerevan and Baku are in an active stage of discussions and about to sign a number of international agreements, there is still noticeable tension. For example, there are ongoing discussions about exchanging territories, plus part of the opposition within Armenia is quite... They are critical of Pashinyan's rapprochement with Aliyev. And in general, this rapprochement itself is forced by Armenia's weak position in the context of its bilateral relations with Azerbaijan, which has regained control over its internationally recognized territories by military means.
That's one less partner. The Kremlin's geostrategist started the war expecting that everyone would be afraid of him, but in the end, everyone began to turn away from him. The Kremlin doesn't actually have that many real tools to influence Azerbaijan. First and foremost, this is because Baku and Aliyev themselves are actively moving closer to Turkey, which has significantly strengthened after the decline of Russian influence. In fact, not only in the South Caucasus region, but also in international politics as a whole.
That's all for now. Stay with us to be the first to know what's happening right now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.